We now go to question 3 to the founders. This question I thought was the acid test to the founders. And here's the question. All your teachings are good, amazing, really impressive. But what I want to know is, how did your life record compare with your own teachings? You know, in that way, I am not the judge. So it was with a sense of safety that I asked this question. And yet it was a pertinent question to me. The one that would be the judge would be the writings, their own writings. How did the writings and their life record compare? And so, teachings versus life of the founders. Here's a statement from the Hindu writings. When a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires can alone achieve peace. Now, there's one thing I found in all religious writings, across the board, major ones. There was clear preponderance, or at least a clear description of our sensual desires, of actually talking about sex. And I think why they did that was because it's such a big part of life on planet Earth. Everybody is thinking and involved with this idea of sensuality and sex. It's not wrong. It just is a part of our lives. And so all the writings talk about it. And all the writings give a cautionary word about it, including this one from Hinduism. Look at what it says. He who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires can alone achieve peace. In other words, it is a requirement that you put this away to its place, not let it come up to the fore. Now, this question was one in which I had to become a little negative. I had to go probing to look for the places where they made mistakes. So if you don't mind, this is one of them in which I will be a little critical. I looked at these authors of the Hindu religion and could not really find a description well enough. And so I went to the description of one of the gods, an incarnate god. The 8th incarnate of the god Vishnu is Krishna. And this is what it says about Krishna. You see, the picture there is Krishna along with a consort or a lady accompanying him. Her name is Radha. Radha is not his wife. Radha is Ayana Ghosha's wife. So look at the statement. When Ayana Ghosha heard of Radha's adultery, he went in search of the couple. However, Krishna assumed the form of a goddess, and they thereby escaped Ayana Ghosha's wrath. The second statement on the screen there is a statement by Gautama Buddha when he was a Hindu. And this is what it says. Our holy books tell us of gods, sages, and heroes who, though high-minded, were addicted to sensuous passions. In other words, the description of what they're supposed to do is very clear. but it looked like they were not keeping to it. In fact, Krishna grew up in a place called Vrindavana, and his only companions were girl cowherds called gopis. And if you look at the picture, he has a flute. He played the flute beautifully. And sometimes what he did by playing was to seduce these girls. And that's why the people of the town didn't like him. In fact, there was one time when these girls went to the river to have a bath. Krishna went and picked all their clothes, climbed up the tree, and he said, "If you want your clothes, come one by one and get it from me." Wow. Most scholars get a little red-faced when they describe this. The fact is, it is true. It's there in their writings, in the Mahabharata. In fact, there's a statement there by a person called Sisupala. Sisupala was on the opposite camp to Krishna. And during one of their darbars or royal meetings, he chided Krishna and he said, "Don't think this is what you are doing. This is war. We're going to war with you. Don't think that this is playing games like taking the clothes of helpless girls who are bathing in the river." In other words, Sisupala was referring to this. So it's there. One of the traditional writings I have read, now I can't vouch for it, but it does say that Krishna had so many, many, many wives. One of the numbers is 16,000. That's a lot. In fact, that same source stated that he had fathered about 180,000 sons. Now that's a lot of sensuality, not wrong, but sensuality in your life. And therefore, we can see that the teachings were not really adhered to in this case. The same thing with Buddhism. Gautama Buddha's words about what the offenses which would expel them from the monastery are these. "Here, venerable gentlemen, are the 4 rules about the offenses which deserve expulsion." And the first one was, if a monk should have sexual intercourse with anyone. The other rules are, you should not steal, you should not murder, and you should not claim to have supernatural powers when you don't have it. So these 4 knock you off the monastery. But the first one, you should not have sexual intercourse with anyone. You know, Gautama Buddha was not, that's not his name. His name was Siddhartha, and he was a prince. His father was a king. When he was born, there was a prophet, a seer, who came down from the Himalayas and came to the kingdom. His name was Asita, prophet Asita, and he told the father, "You're going to have a son, and you have a choice. Either the son is going to become a great world emperor, or he would go out into the wilderness looking for light, truth. Which one do you want?" And the father said, "Well, I want my son to become a world emperor. I don't want him to go out like an ascetic to the wilderness." And so Asita said, "All right, there's a condition. The son, Siddhartha, who's going to be born, must never set his eyes on old age, disease, suffering, and death. 4 things. If he sets his eyes on them, he will leave his palace and go out." So the father, Sudhodana, his name, he said, "All right, I'll keep to it." So he built palaces on his grounds. And he kept Siddhartha on the top stories of the palaces, never letting him come down to the palace grounds or to the town in case he might set his eyes on the prohibited things. But then how do you keep a young man entertained without him coming down? Well, the writings tell us how. From the age of 16 when he was married to the age of 29, there's a description of how he was kept entertained. He was entertained by women minstrels. And this is the description. They entertained him with wanton swayings, butterfly kisses, and seductive glances. Thus he became a captive of these women who were well versed in the subject of sensuous enjoyment and indefatigable in sexual pleasure. Do you see the plural women? In other words, there's more than one. They were not his wives. So he was indulging in sex all the time, every day, week after week, month after month, year after year, for 13 years. And then he left the palace in search for light. So for 13 years, he was doing exactly what he himself said he should not do. Some people say, well, that was before he was enlightened. Yes, that is also true. But if you read the writings of how a person becomes a Buddha, it has to go through one birth after another. And at each birth and life, anything you do has to be accosted with the law of karma, meaning what you do has a reaction. Anything you do, if you do something bad, you have to pay for it. And you do not pay for it in that life, you pay for it in the next life. So here is the picture. If you want to become a Buddha, the previous life must be completely whole, completely innocent, completely free of any mistake. It's not the previous life we're talking about. It is his own life. So, stating that this was only before his enlightenment does not really stand to ground. You know, when he was going off into the wilderness looking for light for those 6 years, this is what he said. In fulfillment of my vows, I have plucked out the hair of my head and the hair of my beard, have gone down to the water punctually thrice before nightfall to wash away what? The evil within. I didn't write those words. These are the words of Gautama Buddha himself. That there was evil that needed washing away. Not just one evil, he would go punctually, meaning more than once. So even Gautama Buddha, wonderful man, did not keep to his own teachings. How about Islam? In chapter 4, Allah says these words, then you may marry other women who seem good to you, 2, 3, or 4 of them. This is the only place in the Muslim writings where Allah states how many wives you can have. And today, a Muslim man can have 4 wives because of this statement. Muhammad's life is really divided into 2. The Meccan years and the years post-Meccan when he was in Medina. In the Meccan years, he had only one wife, Khadija. But when he went to Medina and became really not just a prophet, but a statesman and a general in the army, which he had at that time, he had 11 wives. So, not very sure whether he really kept to this. How about the next statement on the screen? We, meaning Allah, have given you, Muhammad, a glorious victory so that Allah may forgive your past and future, what? Sins. Some people say, don't use the word sin, just mistakes. Fair enough, we'll put the word mistakes. But those mistakes needed forgiveness. That's the point. Now, Muhammad is understood, accepted as the perfect man. And we'll recognize that. In Muslim thought, Muhammad is the perfect man. But the description in the Quran is that this humanly perfect person still had sins and mistakes that needed forgiveness. How about the third statement? Did he, Allah, not find you, Muhammad, in error and guide you? In other words, the perfect man may still have errors. He may be forgiven, but the perfection that is described is not complete perfection. It's a mistake that needed to be forgiven, and then you are perfect. Judaism, the words are, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, meaning thou shalt not tell lies. Let's look at some of the 3 greats in Hebrew. Moses, so he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed him and hid him in the sand. What is that? Murder. How about Abraham, the towering prophet of faith? So he went into Hagar and she conceived. Hagar was not his wife. That is adultery. And then when he goes to a next town or a next country, he pretends that his wife is his sister. And so the king of that country has to chide him and say, why did you not tell me that she was your wife? In other words, he was not keeping to really telling the truth at that particular juncture. So this great, statured individual in Hebrew literature could not keep to his own teachings. How about David? Then David sent messengers and took her. Who is her? Bathsheba. Bathsheba was not his wife. Bathsheba was married to Uriah the Hittite. So when he took her, he was committing adultery. And then to hide the adultery, he sent Uriah with a message. Now, Uriah the Hittite was a soldier. So he took his own death sentence in his hand, went to the commander, and the commander was supposed to set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, retreat from him that he may be struck down and die. Premeditated, cold-blooded murder. None of the three Hebrew greats, none, not Moses, not Abraham, not David, were able to keep up to the teachings that they themselves knew all about and Moses himself had written down. Then we come to this man, Jesus. I'm going to state 12 sentences, and we'll look at all 12. Number one, Pilate. Now, Pilate was a Roman governor. Romans and Jews were not exactly friends. In fact, they hated one another with a passion. And here's still what Pilate said. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man. And in yet another writing, gospel writing, he says, I find no fault in him at all. And number two, he quotes Herod. And he says, neither did Herod find any faults, for he sent him back to us. So, Pilate, a governor, Herod, a king, didn't find any fault in him. How about Pilate's wife? During the trial, she sent a little note to Pilate and said, look, Pilate, be careful about who you are passing judgment on, because I know him, and I have been troubled by a dream because of him. He is a just man, meaning he's a good man. How about number four, the Roman centurion at the cross, when he saw all the things that were happening and looked up at this unusual man, he said, certainly this was a righteous man. And the thief on the cross, there were two thieves. One of them was kind of cursing and complaining. The other one turned to him and said, wait a minute. You and I are dying for our own sins. We did wrong and we got a just punishment. This man has done nothing wrong. Now these five saw him from a great distance away. And from that distance, nothing wrong. How about those who were close to him? Now, in India and the eastern places, they have what is known as the guru-shishya relationship. The rabbi follower, the guru follower. And you live with the guru if you're a follower. And during the day and during your experience with him, your main aim is to watch your guru carefully and copy everything that he does. If he eats in a certain way, well, you also eat in that way. If he walks in a certain way, you walk in that way. If he speaks in a certain way, well, you copy him. In other words, your whole aim in life is to become like your guru. One of the blessings that is given to a shishya or a follower when he leaves home and goes to follow the master, the rabbi, the guru, is this. May you walk so close to your guru, and may the dust of his sandals cover you. In other words, walk very close. That's your whole aim in life. So here we have a guru, a rabbi, Jesus, and he has shishyas and followers. Look at what one of the close disciples of Jesus said. And this, therefore, was a disciple who watched him from morning till night, every day, every week, every month, for 3.5 continuous years. And this is what he said at the end of those 3.5 years. In him, there is no sin. How about disciple, another disciple, Peter? Christ. He described him as without blemish, without a spot. Paul, probably. He was in all points tempted as we are, and yet without sin. These were his loyal disciples. One of his not exactly loyal disciples said, when he went back to the priest after betraying him, he said, I have made the mistake. This man is innocent. He used the word innocent. Can you see that all of them are using the same description? Number 10 is a peculiar, rather unique testimonial to Jesus. The Quran refers to Jesus more than 90 times. About 16 times he is identified as Isa bin Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary. That's peculiar because anyone in those days describing parentage would always describe him by the name of the father. He is one of the few who is described as the son of a mother. So we know that when the Quran says Isa bin Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary, they're referring to the same person. And about 10 or 11 times in the Quran, he is called Masihi, meaning Messiah, in the Quran. And in chapter 3 and verse 46, it says, He, Jesus, shall preach to men in the prime of manhood and shall lead a righteous life. The description is a righteous life. I'd like to just compare this statement with what the same Quran said about Muhammad, the perfect human. Said that he did have mistakes. How about 11? 11 really comes home to me. You know, how many of us, looking into the corners of your conscience and looking at your whole life, can come up and say, I've got a clean slate? I don't think there's any one of us. If you ask me, man, I sink before I even start. There's no chance. But this man, different. He looked at his bitterest enemies, the ones who were thirsting for his death. And he challenged them, saying, which of you convicts me of sin? Show me one that was wrong. Anything that I've done was wrong. Do you know what the response was? Silence. Now, go through history, the whole of the human history, and let us see if we find one individual who looked at his enemies who were thirsting for his death and said, show me one mistake, with the response as total silence. You will not find any. He is the only one with this kind of a record. Compare what he was saying to another person who everyone acknowledges as an excellent, wonderful individual. His Chinese name is Kung Xiu. His Western name is Confucius. Now, if you know anything about Confucius, he was accepted as a wonderful person. Kind, generous, selfless, always helpful. Wow, the best person. But look at what he said about himself. How dare I claim to be a sage or a benevolent man? No. Even Kung Xiu could not look into his conscience and find everything clean. Number 12 are the words in the Sanhedrin. Jesus was tried in the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin does meet at 3 levels. Level 1 is when it is a little crime and it is a little punishment, small punishment. Then a quorum of 3 members of the Sanhedrin can make and pass judgment. When it's more important, for example, you come to a place where you want to pass a death sentence, then you need a quorum of 23 members of the Sanhedrin to pass judgment. If it is of national importance, and it appears that this trial was of national importance, then the rule in the Talmud is that you have to have the full council of 70 members plus 1, the chief priest. Now, we don't know exactly whether the whole 70 members were there, but it would have been definitely more than 23. You know what the highest number of judges in a bench is in most lands? Like, for instance, the United States, it's a 9-judge bench, the highest. Here's 23 judges. Why do they have these numbers? just to make sure that when it's an important decision, that we have the maximum information in. If you put 23 judges of the Jews, members of the Sanhedrin, you would have covered every word of the Torah, from the first word of Genesis to the last word of Deuteronomy. And so they were safe now in passing the death sentence. But here is what happened. The Jewish system requires an open judiciary. In other words, when you have to pass judgment, you make it an open trial. You can bring witnesses for and against. This was an open trial. And so they brought witnesses. 1, 2, 3. They were unable to catch. They were unable to bring it to a point of judgment. They were unable to pass the death sentence. And so against the law, the chief priest, who is a judge, steps down and becomes a prosecuting attorney, as it were, and he comes straight to Jesus and puts him under oath. This was the most sacred oath in the Jewish year. To this oath, you cannot be silent. He puts him under the oath. I adjure you by the living God. That's the oath. Tell us if you are the Son of God. What am I saying really is, they had gone through the trial. They did not find anything wrong. So now the chief priest shifts the question, if you notice. Now the question is not, what did you do or not, what did you not do? But who are you? Why the shift? The trial tells us why. Because bringing all the evidence they could, all the witnesses they could not find a single fault in anything that Jesus had done or had not done. And that is why the chief priest shifted out the whole thrust of that trial from not what you did, but to who are you. And this is probably, in judicial history, the only time when the death sentence was handed down not for an act, but for just his identity. What does that say? None of his acts were punishable. So when you take these 12, now look at the 12. Friends, enemies, countrymen, foreigners, people in high level of society, people in low level, people who are accepted and admired, and people who are criminals. Every one of them said the same thing about this man, Jesus. He is innocent. No fault. Wow. So here, and here alone, did I find one life in whom the theory of his teachings were matched in his practice. Here is the only life in which whatever he had taught had met its complete and final fulfillment in real life. And therefore, as an inquirer, trying to be fair and balanced, I would say that here and here alone do we meet a man who lived his life to an unblemished perfection. If that's the case, then he is the only man, the only founder who could turn around and look every one of us in the eye and say, follow me, for I have set you a perfect example. The only one. So here's the conclusion of the question. Teaching versus life. We point to him again. 15 million minutes of life on this earth. In the midst of a wicked and corrupt generation, every thought, every deed, every purpose, every work, privately and publicly, from the time he opened his baby eyes until he expired on the cross, were all approved of God. Never once did our Lord have to confess any sin, for he had no sin. You know, about this time, I began to get a little restless. I am a medical doctor, a physician, And we are taught when we read journals not to simply swallow what is there, but to critically look at the way the testing was done, the way the experiments were set up, so that it meets a certain criteria. And one of them is that you look at the numbers and hope that the authors were not pushing the numbers to a certain direction, a preconceived direction. You can do it. It's very easy. Let me give you an idea. Suppose the beginning part of an experiment shows 5% and the end of the experiment shows 10%. What is the difference? 5, you'd say, because 5 to 10 is 5. But it could also be 100% because it doubled. So you could put 5, you could put 100. Can you see that you can write numbers which are not exactly the correct one in a certain setting, and you could skew the idea. That's what I mean. So when I looked at what we have done so far, everything seemed to be going one direction. Did you see that? So I said, wait a minute. Am I pushing this man in this book out in front? I could be doing that. Yeah. I could be the driving force, but I didn't want to be because I was doing a search that I felt I would finally be satisfied with. And it's not satisfying if you push your own opinion and finally get it okayed by anyone. If you want to know the truth of the matter, then you've got to look for the truth of the matter. And so I pulled back and I said, well, let me look for some other topics. Specifically look for topics in which he would not come out first. And the next 3 are those. Let's go to them. Number 1, birth and parentage. In Hinduism, there are multiple authors, no specific founder. We saw that. All the authors were revered individuals born to honorable parents. So the birth story is honorable, good. In Buddhism, we had mentioned that the father was a king, Suddhodana. His mother, Maya, was a queen. And he was born in Lumbini Grove, a delightful grove with trees of every kind. And the whole kingdom was happy that a prince was born. So the circumstances of his birth were excellent. Judaism, a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi, bore a son, and she saw that he was a beautiful child, and he became her, that is Pharaoh's daughter's son. The tribe of Levi, not the biggest, not the most powerful in Israel, but it was one of the most important because later on the tribe of Levi would be the tribe to take care of the tabernacle, the most prized possession of the entire nation. So Moses was born into wonderful pedigree, tribe of Levi. Similarly, in Islam, Muhammad was the posthumous son of Abdullah, and his mother was Amina, and they were of the tribe of Quraysh, the clan of Hashim. Now, the tribe of Quraysh was powerful, but it was not the most powerful, nor was it the most numerous in the Arabian Peninsula. But it was extremely important because the tribe of Quraysh was in charge of the Kaaba, that cubicle in Mecca. Even today, when you go for Hajj, pilgrimage, you have to go to that Kaaba, that cubicle, and circumambulate. Then only can you say you have done your pilgrimage. So the tribe of Quraysh, in charge of that, again, the most sacred site of the Muslims. Pedigree, good, honorable. When you come to Christianity, here's the story. They wrapped him in a swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger. Now, where are people born? In a hospital? Or at home? This man was born where animals are kept, and animals are born. Not even where humans are born. And these words, swaddling cloths and manger, have been romanticized by the Christian community. But look, a swaddling cloth is simply rough cloth. You don't hang it up as a curtain. You use it to wipe the table. And one of the uses was strips of swaddling cloth were used to wrap dead bodies. Not exactly complimentary. What about the manger? You know, you've seen these postcards and these Christmas cards that they are sent one to another in the Christian world. You see the manger all beautifully drawn out there, romantically put every straw in place. And sometimes we think that it was absolutely sanitized, and some people even think it was probably deodorized. No, it was not that way. The manger was simply a rough feeding trough where the animals came and ate. That's all. Born in absolute poverty-stricken circumstances. But worse, after his mother was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child. Get that? The only founder conceived out of wedlock. Now, in many parts of the world, especially in the Western world, well, who bothers about that? But no, not in first century ultra-conservative Palestine. No, it wouldn't work. Anyone with this kind of a story, you would be able to clearly make out that the favor of God was not on that family and the person had a moral stain. That's how he began his life. Do you know, in one of the genealogies, Jewish genealogies, when they come down father to the son and then to the son, when they come to Jesus, in one of the genealogies, even his name is not mentioned. It says, so and so, bastard son of an adulteress. How about that to start a life? You know, this epithet followed him all his life. When he went to the temple during the years of his ministry, the elite, the top brass, looked at him and said, You want to come here and teach morals and ethics? We were not born of fornication like you. Get out of here. What a way to start a life. So his birth story, we can clearly see, is the worst of any of the founders. And yet, I did have one question. I'm going to confess it to you. The people said he was illegitimate. And the reason they said that was because, well, they could identify the mother, but they could not identify the father. Now that's strange in one sense, because the description of his life stated that Joseph actually was not his father. The claim is that his father was not of this world. So, the very description that is meant to hound and harass could possibly be a pointer that the story might be true. I don't know. Can't prove it. But the fact that he was called illegitimate might be a pointer to say that his father was not of this world. The second one, the length of ministry. In Hinduism, many generations, and in the end, a very highly organized society. And today the population is nearly 1 billion. In Buddhism, Gautama Buddha preached and traveled and converted people and expounded his message and his mission for 45 years, from the age of 35 to the age of 80. And at the end, there were monasteries set up. It was an organized society, and today the population is around 405 million. In Judaism, Moses led the children of Israel for 40 years, changing that ragtag bunch of slaves into a well-organized nation with civil laws, health laws, and an army. And today the population is tens of millions. In Islam, from 610 AD to 623 AD, Muhammad got all his revelations from the angel Gabriel and spread them around. And once he spread them around, he got them to be one big unit. All these different tribes in the Arabian Peninsula, brought them together and made not just a spiritual group, but a state, country, nation, and he was their general. So he organized them. In the end, at his death, there was an organized group, ready to go and conquer the world. In fact, so many years later, this same group, which years later and generations later formed the mighty Ottoman Empire. But it all started with those 23 years of Muhammad. Today the population is over 1 billion. Christianity, look at the number. 3.5 years. That is all. Look at the comparison. Generations, 45 years, 40 years, 23 years, and suddenly only 3.5 years. How come? Why? The answer reveals a truly pathetic picture. Jesus did not die of some sudden disease or an accident. He died because he was hated with a passion, booted out from his community, and put to death. That is why it is only 3.5 years. And at the end of those 3.5 years, all that was left was a bunch of demoralized and shattered individuals. Can you see that? Short period of ministry. In fact, it's so short. In fact, it is the shortest. So, naturally, some questions would arise. The shortest period of ministry, ending with complete shattering of his group, and yet today the population of those who go by his name is 2 billion, the biggest number. There must be a question that will arise in any inquirer's mind. But at this point, all we can say is of the number, of the description of the length of ministry, he comes out last. 3.5 years, and that's it. Circumstances at death. This is the third of the questions I asked where Jesus would not come out first, but it's number 9 of the full questions, number 6 of the questions to the founders. And so circumstances at death. The Hindu sages were honored at their death, and today they are revered and held in high respect. In Buddhism, he died in Kusinara, Gautama Buddha, surrounded by his disciples who strained to catch every one of his last words. In other words, surrounded by doting, admiring people. The body was wrapped in 1,000 layers of finest Banaras cloth and cremated. Banaras is the name of a town. Varanasi is the name today. It is well known, at least was well known, for its silk. They could weave very fine silk. You see these Indian women wearing their saris, 6-7 yards long, 1.5 yards wide. Do you know that in those days they could weave silk so fine that you could take that whole sari and fold it up and put it into a matchbox? Fine. And when you wrapped a body with 1,000 layers of this fine silk, you are giving that body the highest respect anybody can give. So that's the circumstances of the death of Gautama Buddha. Highly honored. Islam. Umar, who was one of the leaders, said, I was dumbfounded and fell to the ground when he heard about Muhammad's death. Why? Because suddenly he realized that a great leader had gone. And in the town, as soon as the word spread, we could see ladies slapping their cheeks and beating their chests and breasts, wailing, because that was the time-honored method of respectfully saying goodbye to an individual who was revered. And so all these expressions of respect and admiration at their death. Moses was 120 years old when he died, and the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. It's like the president in office has died. What do we do today? Well, let's have a state mourning. All offices closed, all shops closed. Nobody goes to university. Flag at half-mast. 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. Here's a state mourning for 30 days. The whole nation at a standstill. Doing what? Paying their respects. Giving them respect. Saying that a great leader had gone. When you come to Jesus, the picture is entirely different. Look at the way he died. With him were also crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. And he was numbered with the criminals, transgressors. criminals. One on his right and one on his left. When there's an odd number, in those days, it was understood that the one who was in the center was the worst criminal. And so this is how he died. Crucified as a criminal. If you look at the picture on the screen, you will find a loin cloth around his waist. Do you know what that is? That is just the artist who is hoping to be decent in his drawing and in his painting. Those who were crucified in the times of the Roman Empire were crucified stark naked. These criminals were so vile that it was okay to strip them of every last vestige of dignity. Strip them completely naked. Put them up on the cross. Everyone can see their shame. Humiliating. From henceforth, that family would never be able to raise their heads in public. It was over, gone. He was numbered with the criminals. That's how he died. And worse, from his own mouth came these words. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? Who died as a criminal, naked, hanging there for the world to see, and from his own lips, forsaken of God. What can be worse than that? Do you know why the chief priests and the rulers asked for crucifixion? They had accused him in the Sanhedrin of blasphemy. According to the Torah, the punishment for blasphemy is stoning. Why did they ask for crucifixion? Because when you read the record, that's all they asked for. Can we have him crucified? In the Torah is another statement which says that if a capital punishment is meted out, and if that capital punishment was to be by hanging, then it would be the incontrovertible sign that this person was cursed of God. In other words, he was so vile, he was so dirty, he was so horrible that you should not leave the body even above ground that day. Please bury him. That is what the Torah said here in Deuteronomy 21 and verse 23. You shall surely bury him that day so that you do not defile the land, for he who is hanged is accursed of God. What a way to end a life. So he was condemned and sentenced to death by the highest religious authority in his nation, the Sanhedrin. The highest civil and judicial authority in the world, Rome. And the highest authority in the universe to a Jewish mind, God himself. That is how he went. Jesus then, the only founder to die a violent, shameful, humiliating criminal's death. You know, when you see the story, we have to agree to one thing. His death was the worst compared to any other founder. It's not the worst in the line. Actually, he belongs to another line altogether, completely separate, the most horrible. When I looked at it, I agreed to that. It's the worst. But certain questions did spring up in my mind. Why would some top-notch artist and sculptors make some superb works with this man's ideas and parables and stories as the theme of their work? And they are today hung in some of the most prestigious museums in the world. How come this man, this criminal story is there? If I gave you $500 million and I said, go ahead and build a university, would you, in building the university, put the name of a criminal on the central buildings? And yet, that is what's happened. In many of the universities which they started out in his name. His name is right there in the central buildings. Why? You know, when you look out in the world and see natural disasters and wars, there is a group that runs to those places to help others. They sometimes are there the earliest, and they stay there the latest, the last to leave, because they want to help. Who are these? Strangely, they go by the name of this criminal. I have seen some of them come to my country in India, where I was born and brought up. They don't come to where I was. They would go out really to way outside there, to the rural areas. Sit on the ground with them, eat their dirty food, drink their dirty water, contract their diarrheal diseases, and some of them finally succumb and die there. And then they are put into a little hole in the ground with a mound of dirt over it. Not even a name tag nearby. What causes them to do that? Leave the comforts of your home and go out to speak for this man? Who are you talking about? And all they can point to is a half-naked body on a cross. It does not make any sense, my friends. It does not make any sense to a fair inquirer. How come this? Who put his name in the middle of Western civilization's history and split that history into two, BC and AD? Wow, who put him there? Why should he be there? Do you know you write checks and documents, and every one of those checks or documents have to be dated, and only then they are valid. Do you know what that date is? What does it refer to? It refers to the birth of this criminal. Therefore, I had to agree in my mind that this criminal was not a usual criminal. There was something that was there unanswered. He died this way, agreed. But what about these questions? And that is what led me to the 10th and final question that we will do next. What happened after death? Look at one point. In the earlier parts, we realized and we came to the idea and we were confronted with the fact that this man was the most innocent. He had led the most blameless life. And yet when we come to this question, which we just saw now, he died the most horrible death. That is also a big question, isn't it? It came to me as a question. I had to address it, and we will address it later on. Why should the most innocent die the most horrible death? If we honestly, with a fair mind, go into getting a response to that question, I believe it will really open our eyes. For now, we will go to the last question: what happened after